Welcome! My name is Kelly Anderson, and this is Fanimated, an animation fan podcast where we get a chance to geek out about our favorite animated media. This week, Josh the Plata Palmer and I are going to be discussing the 2007 Disney animated film Meet the Robinsons. Although a commercial failure for the studio, this film is one of our Disney favorites, and we can't wait to dive into this story. So thank you to the patrons who voted on this topic, and here's your spoiler warning for Meet the Robinsons. Now let's get started and let's get animated. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kelly. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm just full of hope and future optimism thanks to Meet the Robinsons.
Yeah, that's a big statement. Full of hope and future optimism. I mean, I would like to think that this film does that to anybody because it's so optimistic. So much. It's
very optimistic. I just want to live in the Meet the Robinsons future. Can we make that happen,
yeah.
Please?
You know, I wondered how long was it, from the beginning when he's a child to their future, because it seems like a long time, but he's only I don't know, middle-aged when he's inventing.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that they're like, oh yeah, 30 years maybe he could change the world and invent a time machine and there's flying cars. So optimistic.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Oh, it's so great. Oh man. So of course we're talking about Meet the Robinsons today.
Yes.
And this topic was voted on by our patrons. So thank you to all of our patrons for voting on this topic. I just really wanted to go back to some fun Disney movies that don't get discussed as much. And Meet the Robinsons is just one of those gems that, Disney just produces so many instant classics that even something as wonderful and just fun as Meet the Robinsons can kind of get hidden within all of the other gems. So it's fun to go back and watch this one. I know I have always really loved this film, and I go back to it a lot when I just need it. And what's your history with Meet the Robinsons? When was the first time you watched it, if you remember, and have you watched it a lot since?
That's a great question. I don't know when the first time I watched it was. Because it was 2007, so I would have been in junior high or something like that, because I would have been 13 when it came out. And I probably saw it pretty early, but I don't really remember. I don't think I really appreciated it until later. Maybe I'd watched it a few times in high school, but in college I really liked it because one of my roommates really liked it. And he had the Keep Moving Forward theme song where they're at dinner and there's all the fireworks. He had that as his ringtone when I met him.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I associate the whole film and all of the fun stuff that happens with him because he loved it so much.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. Everyone needs a ringtone like that. I will say for me that I don't remember either if I saw this in theaters or when I first saw it, but it's definitely one that I go back to a lot, and I've always really, really adored this film and the characters, and watching back through it now, I think I'm just appreciating it in a different way. As a kid, I was just always, I still am, but I just really loved the time travel aspect, right? I love when I love going back to moments where it's oh, Wilbur is seeing Lewis with his brain scanner machine, and I just like to think about oh, well, at the beginning, Wilbur knows where Lewis is going, because and we can go all into all this in a bit, but I just like the idea of someone knowing what's gonna happen. and going back and like rewatching things with the knowledge that you have by the end. But like now I rewatched it and I was like, just loving it for how like fun and inventive it is, and just like, I just definitely saw it in a different way, I suppose. Which truly, I say this a lot when we talk about films, like a film is always new, or a show is always new to you because you're a different person every time you watch it. But like this time I really felt that. Like I was like, wow, this didn't like hit the same way that it used to. And I'm just like, wow, I'm an adult and this is hitting in so many different ways. So I'm excited to talk about it. For those of you who don't know Meet the Robinsons, quick synopsis. The film follows Lewis, and he is an orphan. He's just a kid who's super smart, very inventive, and he likes to create new things and just kind of explore the world around him and imagine possibilities. And he hasn't had a lot of success in getting adopted. And so he decides, okay, I'm going to build a brain scanner so I can remember what my mom looked like and then try to find her, and maybe she still wants me, and blah, blah, blah. He's just searching for family. That's his overarching goal throughout the film.
It's all we ever want.
It's all we ever want. It's true. Tis true. And Lewis is trying to find that through, looking to his past, looking for his mom that left him at the orphanage. But in the midst of, bringing it to the science fair, this new invention, this brain scanner, he bumps into Wilbur.
Or Wilbur bumps into him, rather.
Yeah, that's true. I love these two characters just in general, how Lewis is like, I'm focusing on this thing, I'm doing this thing, and like is much more unsure of himself, and Wilbur is the one who's like super overly confident about everything.
Yeah. Very confident.
Like, you have a 99.99999 chance you will not exist. I like those odds. Like that little scene. He's just confident about everything. But I digress. Wilbur relays this crazy story that he is from the future, and there's this bowler hat guy who is also from the future, who took a time machine, and Wilbur, is from the future, and he's like, you got to go back and fix your brain scanner because, of course, bowler hat guy messed it up. And Lewis doesn't have any confidence in himself and in his abilities, and so Wilbur is like, well, I'll prove it. I'll prove him from the future, and brings him to the future. So now Wilbur and Lewis are in the future, except, of course, the time machine breaks. They crash land, and now they're in trouble because they're stuck in the future, and Lewis needs to get back to the past. So, of course, Lewis meets the whole Robinson gang. That's where we get our title from, and chaos ensues. Basic story premise. Of course, we get a lot of other really fun things within that. But it's mostly about Wilbur and Lewis, like, regardless of how many really fun and interesting characters there are. And Goober, I should say.
Key character.
Definitely. Key character. Yes. So let's just keep talking about the characters. Like,
okay.
Who could you name one character that's your favorite? I know there are a lot.
Yeah, if I was to name a character that was my favorite, I'd probably say Bowler Hat Guy. He's my favorite.
Why?
Yeah, I mean, he's like such a derpy villain, but everything he does is so funny, and it's so sad and pathetic. But like, it's so funny to me. He tries so hard, and he just can't get anything right. And I love failure. Yeah. I love watching it happen. So it's like, it's so funny to me that, to me, Bowler Hat Guy slash Goob and Lewis are basically two sides of the same coin. You know, Bowler Hat Guy is like
Absolutely.
Lewis's foil, so to speak. And I think that's why I like him so much, because he, I like his voice. First off, I like the characterization of his voice. It's so funny that he talks so dramatically, like straining his voice all the time, and just brings me joy. And the way his body moves is weird and gangly, and he's got like a cape, and he's got the mind of a like 6-year-old, but he's like in his 40s. It's just so funny. I love that. And I love that he's not really the villain in the end, you know, Doris, the bowler hat itself turns out to be the real villain.
Yes.
Because she was like an invention that Lewis makes later in life that goes wrong and tries to seek revenge and like create her own timeline. And first off, that's brilliant too, because I love like timelines and universes crossing, and like it's so like fun to think about. So that's really why I like Goob, is because you think he's this like maniacal villain right at the beginning, and then it turns out he's just like a hurt kid who never healed.
Yeah. Yes, it's true. I do too. Like, and that realization, like, for Lewis, like when Lewis and Goob are finally like in the old orphanage, and it's like, oh no, Goob, you know, and going back to what you said, like they're both this like two sides of the same coin. Goob and Lewis are, and it's true because they both are focused on the past. And for Goob, that's like, oh well, I missed this one baseball, catch, and he basically ruins his whole life because he's just thinking on the past. And like, you know, even in his story that he tells Lewis, he's like, I was hated by everyone, but like in the memory there are kids who are like, hey Goob, like, do you want to go?
Hey Goob, how's it going?
Yeah.
Nice backpack.
Right.
They all hated me.
Yes.
So funny.
And it's like he's making up this, I mean, it's so true though, right? Like we totally like, we make up our own realities in our mind that are most often not accurate at all. So I totally relate to that.
And I love that he does that with like when there's the montage of him like growing up while still being in the orphanage, and like he stays there forever and just listens to like radio clips of Lewis succeeding and just, you know, getting more and more crazy. And it's so evident that it's clearly his fault for doing that, because he just sat there and like, you know, grumbled it for years and years and years. And then at the end of the montage, he says, I finally realized that it wasn't my fault at all. It was Lewis's fault. It's
Yes.
Like, how he came to that conclusion is like pure madness. And I think it's stretching the reality of, like you said, we all do that. I do that all the time. I come up with narratives for what I think other people are thinking about me, or what I've done that like other people think about, and they're just usually so wrong.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're based on like a little bit of truth that I'm not like strong enough to grapple with, or I'm just like not confident enough to deal with my issue. And so I, you know, come up with somebody else that's their fault. You know, you blame it on someone else instead. And I think that's really real. That's just what people do.
I agree. Goob is the most relatable character, honestly. Like, I mean, his quote, you know, is like, take responsibility for my own life or blame you. Ding, 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 blame you wins hands down. And it's like everyone has that mentality, right? Like, we don't want to take responsibility for our own choices, but like we just want to like, oh, we didn't do this, like, oh, well, it's someone else's fault, like it can't be our fault. When really, you know, taking that responsibility is what, you know, helps you change and to do more. So like in discussing Goob, we should talk about the other side of the coin, which is Lewis. And
Oh yeah, the main character.
Main character. But like just an easy transition into like he is. I mean, they both kind of go down the same path. That like Lewis is also too focused on the past. He's thinking, oh, he really wants a family. Well, he thinks he can get that from his past instead of trying to look around him and try to, you know, build something futuristically. So, and I really think that like both of them could have easily gone down similar paths in similar ways. And for Lewis, like it takes a time machine for him to realize that he has a future, you know, like, and like, that's so drastic, really. Like, he really thinks, and he makes a mistake too, right? It's not just thinking about the past family-wise. It's like, he goes to the science fair and his machine blows up. And he's like, that's it, I'm done.
Everything's over.
Everything's over. And like, that one mistake, you know, he could have gone down the same path as Goob and just drowning in that one mistake and never moving forward. And to be able to see like, oh, you know, I can, you know, make these things happen. And I, you know, seeing the family that he will one day have inspires him. And it's like, oh man, I mean, I don't know if I'd want to see my future, but like, it's such a big, powerful thing that like, I wish I could have that kind of confidence, you know, like this is possible because I've seen it happen kind of idea. Like Lewis goes back to the past and, you know, they say it's like, well, you have to make it happen. You can make it happen. So it's not guaranteed. It's not like he can just sit back and let it, you know, that future unfold. He has to actually work for it. But like, wouldn't it be great to have that confidence of like, this is possible?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that would be so helpful.
Yeah.
There's like so many times in my life where I've been like, I don't know what to do. I'm scared because I don't know what the outcome is going to be. And then like, you know, I get all anxious and whiny and pathetic. and then I don't like, it immobilizes me sometimes, you know, just because you don't know what's going to happen. And then you have to take risks and you have to do that. You just have to. But it would be nice to have the confidence that like, this is going to work. Totally it's going to work. I mean, I think about like business people sometimes who are like investors, and I'm like, that's a lot of confidence to like invest in some like random business or some some project or like on a Kickstarter campaign and be like, I'm gonna give this a ton of money and like to think that it's gonna come back. Like that is the same kind of feeling, but people do that all the time and succeed at it, and it's a big deal. I feel like I try to do that with my life and my work that I do, but it's not always easy. So you're totally right. Like, oh man, if only we had a time machine even to go like a month forward.
Yes, yeah. And yeah, I just keep going back to like the idea of like the mistakes and like just getting hung up on them, because I feel like that's where my faults lie the most. In you know, just focusing on the things that I've done wrong or that I think are wrong, you know, or and getting so caught up in that it affects, you know, taking steps forward, because it really does. It can kind of like keep you tethered, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was thinking about how different you could interpret, or how different Lewis and Goob interpret what happens in their life, right? And you could focus on the past, or you could focus on the future, and you can focus on a success, or you can focus on your failure. And essentially, the two of them like just keep choosing the opposite choice from each other, and you kind of see it play out. And I think that it's really interesting because it's not as simple as like, don't think about the past, or don't think about the future, or don't think about your success, or don't think about your failure. It's not just that. It's like all of it together. Really what it means is you just keep moving forward regardless of what you're focused on, or regardless of what like weaknesses you have as a person, or you keep thinking about your failures, you keep thinking about what you could be or what you aren't, or something like that. And you and I think have different angles on that same take, which is kind of cool.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And Lewis like has to, like, that's his whole arc. Like, he has this big character development of becoming, confident and being able to go back to the science fair and be like, wait, it's gonna work this time, and just keep coming back, because like before that he was, and for whatever reason this was his pinnacle invention that's kind of like at the balance of everything. And for Goob, like, at least his older self, he kind of recognizes like, oh, what do I do? And I wonder, because like when I say all of this basically to say, when Lewis goes back to his present and he's going back to the science fair, and then he rushes over to the baseball game.
Yes.
And wakes up Goob.
Yes.
And Goob catches the ball. And that should, or might, it's implied that everything's happy now because he didn't make that one mistake that causes him to go down this path. But I wonder, because he hadn't, he's still the same Goob he was before, would he still make that same mistake, just like with another mistake? In other words, like, would he still dwell on the past and still like fall into that trap, just with something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's very possible that he could. I think there's a montage when he's growing up earlier in the film where he makes the mistake, he doesn't catch it, and then he kind of obsesses over it because he gets made fun of so much, right? And it's like this defining moment in his life where like everyone hates him for that moment, even if they don't hold on to it, but it like hurts him so deeply that he just keeps ranting about it. And so he tells every single family that tries to adopt him about it, and he isn't unable to grow because he's so obsessed over that mistake. But if he doesn't make that mistake, then potentially he could have been adopted. And if he was adopted, then he would be, his family would hopefully teach him and help him grow in other ways that he, wouldn't have in that other future. And then he wouldn't have that flaw. The question would just be, how deep is that flaw? Is it as core to Goob as his like existence, like no matter what he's always going to be obsessive over his mistakes? Or did that one mistake cause him to be obsessive? I don't know.
Who knows? I don't know. I guess I would hope that he could have a different future and he's not destined to make the same mistakes. But who knows? Who knows?
It raises questions of free will.
Yeah.
Destiny. And
is this predestination?
What's so fun. Yeah, there's predestination in there. There's different timelines and time travel. And like it connects to... I just love time travel because of that. Science fiction is the greatest.
It seriously is. And I love this movie.
I think the only other thing to say about Lewis would be that I think when I was growing up, personally, I related to him more because I like thought really highly of myself at the time. And so I was like, I think I'm as smart as this kid, but I don't have those kind of hang-ups and mistakes. And I would always, think that was not true. And as I'm an adult now, I realize I really do have more common with Goob than I do with Lewis.
Yeah.
But I think Lewis, like, what's really special about him, you know, because he's a really special kid. He's super smart, and he's coming up with these genius inventions. And what it reminds me of is the people out there in the world who are also like really exceptional people often have these like big glaring flaws like he does. And it's kind of cool to think about that, because he, in this case, overcomes it, or at least we think that he will, based on his future. And that's kind of a neat thing. I like that about him. I like that he really changes a lot. He goes from, he's like this genius kid, but he's got a big flaw, and into, you know, he's a lot more humble at the end. You know, he's Tom Selleck. So
yes. Which, like, side note, this was the first time I watched the movie that I actually got the Tom Selleck joke.
Really?
Because
so funny.
I did not realize, because Tom Selleck voices older Lewis, and and that's why it's like, oh, what does your dad look like? Tom Selleck. Okay.
Oh, okay. And then it's so subtle, and then they show a picture of him.
I mean,
it's just
I always thought it was kind of funny, but like I just assumed, oh, that's some random actor that whatever is just kind of out of nowhere. Yep. But like then you realize that Tom Selleck voices Lewis, and you're like, oh, that's why it's funny. Okay. It's little things like that I just like, oh my gosh, are just hilarious. And they're all over the place if you know where to look, you know, like just like the writers having a lot of fun with like just meta jokes.
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
Yep. There's lots of meta jokes. There's lots of like just absurd jokes too, things that happen.
I will also say too that like I, as a kid, definitely related to Lewis as well, just for like that insecurity, you know, of life, that it's like, oh, I can't do this. And like, that's what Lewis is telling himself, right? All the time. Can't do this. And then suddenly he's surrounded by the Robinsons, and they're like, great job, you failed. Like, you know, and they just have the motto, keep moving forward. Right. And what I love too about that idea is like, not, you know, like from failure, you learn, from success, not so much.
Yeah.
I really like that part of that.
Good line. Super good line.
I wish I could like embrace that and live that out more, because like I feel like a lot of people can feel like trapped in perfectionism, or like if I don't do something well, then it's not worth doing. But it's that idea of like, you know, putting in your 10,000 hours, or like you know, creating just as much like quantity over quality in some ways. Like the more you do something, the better you'll get at it, instead of focusing for hours and hours on one thing.
Yes. Yes.
I guess in like my creative sphere, like sketching as much as I can see in a big sketchbook is going to be, I mean, they're, you know, more beneficial in some respects than like spending that same time, like hours and hours on like one drawing, you know, like, yes, it's good to do kind of both, but like in general, like the best art advice is to just draw a lot, not to draw perfectly, but to just draw a lot. So in whatever discipline you're in, like that same kind of rule applies probably. So
yes, it does.
I really love just that reminder of like, not only keep moving forward, but also embracing your mistakes. Your mistakes should be celebrated, right? And that's going back to Goob now too, like making the connection of like, oh, well, Goob's mistake was not celebrated. He was like put down and like literally beaten up. And how different would life be if we celebrated mistakes just as much as, you know, your successes. Your failures are just... Your failures are more important, and yet they hurt so much more, you know, like you want to have a success, but it's like you want, it's just, oh man, it's just so hard because I say all these things and I'm like, yes, yes, but it's so hard to live out.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's like it feels like it should be so easy to be like, oh well, keep moving forward all the time because you know you make a mistake, well, sing a song about it and it'll be fine. and that's not how easy it is. But I've had that thought lots of times of like I am working on a song or I'm working on a story or a picture or a film or whatever my creative project is at that time, and I like don't want to share it because it isn't perfect, so I'm like still working on it, and then I get to a point where I'm like, this is like not that great. It's like not that thought through, as as the frog and the dinosaur say. You know, I don't think this was really that this plan was not that thought through.
Yes.
Or what's the line is, I'm not sure how well this plan was thought through. And I think that about my songs or whatever, and then I don't share them, and I get down on myself and be like, it's just not worth it. It's whatever. And then you stop and then you don't want to work on it or whatever. And so then time goes by and then blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, oh, I wish I played ukulele more, or I wish I drew more or was better at it. Well, you would be if you were making more of those things.
Right.
And what's interesting to me too is like the sharing piece is really hard. Because it's not just about making a lot of things too. You know, I think there's a component of like sharing all the work that you're making too, even if it's like to one person or to, you know, you're not necessarily publishing it in a magazine or something. You maybe publishing it on social media, maybe, but it's also could just be sending it to someone. And I think that piece is important because I think, and we're getting esoteric about art here.
Yes, but as our conversations do.
Yeah, they tend to. Art is about others. It's not just about you. I'm not the kind of artist that's a self-indulgent. It's just about my self-expression and like what I want to say. I think that in anything that you create, it's a form of communication. It's a form of connection. And so it's not just about me and my thing. It's about me and the others and how they're receiving it, what it's evoking in them, how we're responding, and so there's this key element of like how someone responds to this thing that I make, even if that thing is teeny tiny or not that great, but like it has to be done because it has to in your head connect with how someone else sees it. Otherwise, it's kind of it becomes obsessive like Goob in the same way. You know, he obsesses over his plans and then they don't make sense and they don't work because all he's ever done is think about them. He's never acted upon like the ideas that he's had, and then he would realize that they're bad, and then when he finally starts to throughout this movie, you're like, oh, these are all bad ideas, but he's been thinking about how great they are for years. Or like a moment happens where he like spontaneously comes up with an idea and he has no idea that it's not good because he's never tested it with others. And that testing, that sharing is like a refining process, you know. It like helps you get better if you're willing to like share it. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's art.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. Like sharing is such an integral part to like developing yourself as an artist, regardless of what your art form is. And like, I think even about like these animated films that we talk about, right? Like there is something inherent about art. Like, yes, these artists are making something wonderful, and there's like a lot of artistic value, but it's like part of the art is like going and like having people see it, and like every single person that sees a film is having their own experience of it because you know, they have their own perspectives and worldviews, and it's going to reach them in different ways, and Man, I love all of this.
Deep, Kelly.
The other thing that you said that like triggered this response, and I know Josh, you've heard this story a lot, but like if I was solely focused on perfectionism, I would have yet to release a podcast episode at all. One of the biggest things that I've learned in having this podcast for almost 100 episodes is like quantity over quality in a lot of ways. Like if I was so focused on quality all the time, I wouldn't be able to release on a normal schedule. Like I might not have released anything at all. Like in general, my creative perspective is something done imperfectly is better than something perfect and never done. Yeah. And my greatest example is this podcast. And like my highest, as of right now, as of this recording, like my highest downloaded episode is the one where you, Josh, are on the roof of your apartment building and we hear all sorts of crazy street noise. Is that the best quality audio? No. But is that like, does it matter? I mean,
no.
Not really. Because we still had a really great conversation.
Right, it was a great conversation, and if it was really low quality where like you couldn't get through it because it was painful to listen to, or like, you know, you couldn't understand us, that's different than, you know, the quality is bad because there's an airplane and a helicopter and an ambulance and a dog all at the same time.
Right. Like, and that goes back to like you were saying, art as communication. Like if the communication is happening, even if it's not pristine, super professional quality, like you're still reaching people. So
yeah. Oh, let me add this because you just sparked an idea for me. So art as communication, right? Whatever it is. I think that I'm going to dare to make a bold statement here.
Great.
In our time, we are so focused on social media and quick bursts of communication that we don't have the depth or the patience to create communication clear enough to say what we really mean. And when you make something with art, you're able to say what you mean in a way that comes directly from the heart.
Absolutely.
And you may not like, okay, you know what I mean? Like I'm coming up with this on the spot, so I'm like,
yeah, really, I'm already sold.
My gears are turning here, and you can hear it in my voice.
Continue.
It's just like think about it like this. Our society right now is tumultuous at best.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things to think about. There's global warming and climate change. There's racism. There's sexism. There's political turmoil. There's
a pandemic.
There's a pandemic. There's, you know, like you think about like just there's religion. There's science. There's people coming up with the discoveries of different geckos that they never thought existed, but now they do. And you're like, where did that come from? And it's all news.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's just so much that happens. And I say all that because like, I have a really hard time processing all of that. I would dare to say everyone does. And we have different ways of figuring out how to handle it. And like in our worldview, right? Whether that's through talking to other people, through posting something on Facebook, through reading articles, through watching videos or whatever. But what I think art does in any form is it is a channel for you to process the input around you, and you can come up with what you say or what you think about something or what you feel about something by telling a story through a picture or a written word or a film or a song. And like I've been thinking a lot about the politics of now, and like I have a really hard time standing up on Facebook and saying, anything.
Yes, seriously.
At all.
Same.
I mean, I took a big long hiatus from social media so that I could like process everything. I did it for a big chunk of 2020, and for most of 2021 so far. I have not been on social media, probably three times. Yeah. And it's February, so like I've taken a step back so that I could process all these things and come up with something to say. I don't know necessarily what that's going to be yet, but I know that I'm processing. And I think that there's a lot of rush to say things. And I think that can be really good because it also forces you to look at what you really believe right now. But I think at the same time, we need time to digest what's happening around us. And one of the ways we do that is through watching Meet the Robinsons.
Yes.
Talking about it.
Yes. Oh man, there's so many good thoughts there. And like, I want to digest all of it. But like, one thing certainly that, that...
I hope that was not too intense for your audience. I'm sorry, audience, if I'm like yelling at you.
No. I mean, this is what this show is. We just go deep into whatever rabbit hole that these shows and stories like bring up for us, and for this one, this is where we're at. Like, I love it. To summarize, you're basically saying like art can say things that like a social media post cannot.
Yes, that is what I'm saying.
And I love that because I mean, I could write and tweet about how I'm feeling or what's going on in my brain right now. But like, I have not been able to connect so deeply with how I feel than when I listen to certain songs. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this isn't even in English, but this is because I listen to a lot of J-pop, but this like speaks to my soul.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just art that like can say so much more than words can.
Yeah. And we should still say like the words are important to say still too. Some things need to be said.
Words have so much power, and use them wisely. Yeah. We are gonna start going down a rabbit hole about social media. Ooh, but
here we go.
Like, I think the other thing about social media that I think about in this conversation is that with mistakes and perfectionism and all of that, like social media, I believe, like has ingrained that perfectionism within us even more. Like, we feel like because in this world now, we post something online and it's been immortalized instantaneously. But we are people who change and grow, and we have to allow that. Like, I'm sorry, please don't hold me to the same standard as my 13-year-old self posting on Facebook. Ugh. Like, and we see so many things online that are tailored to be perfect. And so we think we have to be perfect too. We have to post things that are perfect. And there's so much pressure on perfectionism that there isn't as much room to just play, to just create and explore. And again, I'm just relating this back to visual art because that's where I am a lot of the time in social media. And I see it all the time with artists, like, who, especially very young artists, who are like, I have to have a style, I have to have a theme, I need my Instagram to look like cohesive. And I'm like, no, you don't. Mm-hmm. You need to explore, like play, like try a different medium, like, play with watercolors, then go back to digital, then go into acrylic, like do whatever you want, like explore. Like, you're not going to suddenly have one style like right away, and you're not going to find where you fit the best until you've explored your options. And you know, you're not going to grow unless you like just do stuff all the time and do stuff.
Yeah.
You know, anyway, so yeah, just bringing it all back, like mistakes are healthy and good, and like it, and again, I have a hard time living this out as well. Like, it's really hard, but like, we are our mistakes. We are built from our mistakes. I learned just today, I learned about how trees, how they like build resistance and build strength. Because there was this biodome project where they have this ecosystems inside these perfect indoor, you know, domes. And the trees grew super fast, super fast. They were doing great. They were like faster than you would see out in nature. But then they got so tall and they just fell over. They just fell right on over. Why? Because they didn't build strength. Because in the biodome, there's no wind.
Oh, yeah.
There's no wind in the biodome, and the trees fell over.
Good. That's good. There's no wind in the biodome.
There's no wind in the So you need that wind. You need that resistance, because that's what's going to build you stronger, and you'll grow those roots down deep, and you'll be able to stand regardless of the wind. You need the good stresses, the good mistakes to build stronger. Think of another analogy. You're building muscle, right? You know, do some crunches or whatever, and you're tearing your muscles apart. But they're rebuilding stronger.
Yes.
So
they get stronger because you do that. Yeah.
Your mistakes are like wind.
Oh man.
And you are
that
a tree.
Is so great. You are a tree, and there's no wind in the biodome. Then you will fall over.
Yes, you don't want to be
so
in perfect biodome. You want to be in the wind.
Wow, Kelly. I think you just found like the hashtag of the year. There's no wind in the biodome.
There's no wind in the biodome.
So good.
Oh, thanks.
I love that. And okay, so let's try to connect the dots now.
Great.
So without mistakes, we fall over.
Yeah.
Because there's no success that's well, okay, case in point, think about this is probably debatable, but I would say a lot of young artists who skyrocket to fame quickly either don't stay there long or it crushes them. Mm-hmm. And they spend the rest of their life redefining who they are because they thought it was some famous success or some big thing that they've defined their life around, and then it ends, or you know, the pressure gets to them and then they can't go on. That happens to child actors like a lot. Mm-hmm. Very common. If we build our successes off of our failures and our attempts instead, even though it's super hard because it requires you to be humble and vulnerable and say that I'm not the best, I'm not great, I'm just me, and you know, you have to put away that, I don't know if it's marketing or like what, but some sort of voice that we learn from somebody, commercialism maybe, that we're supposed to talk about ourselves like we're the best, and you put that away, and then you can grow. So if Lewis doesn't do that in the timeline that's created at the end of the film, hypothetically speaking, he could let the future get to him. So this is all hypothetical, right? Let's imagine the future beyond the film. The film is over, and Lewis is like, ha ha ha, I know what the future holds for me now. I'm successful. And he holds on to that part, and he like makes all of his inventions with this exuberant confidence of I'm the best. And like even when he makes things that aren't great, he holds on to like, well, no, this is good because I saw it in the future. I know it's good. Um, I I don't think that he would create the same future. I think he'd end up making a different future where, you know, it's not maybe not as glorious as he wanted. The only way that that future can happen is if he accepts that even if he knows the future, he has to work. Like we said earlier, he has to work for it. He has to fail and fail and fail and keep moving forward.
Yes, indeed. Exactly. Like even though he sees a possible future, he still has to work to make that happen. And you just like sparked another memory of this film where Wilbur is explaining to Lewis how his dad built the time machines and how he tries again and 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 again. Like it's that again, the wind, right? The wind keeps blowing and there's all of these mistakes and you keep moving forward. You just keep trying. You just keep going. Oh man. And how I just love this film because you look at Lewis and you're like, how different, how fundamentally like different he is in that future versus his 13-year-old self at the science fair and feeling absolutely dejected and, you know, tearing his notebook to shreds. So yeah, I hope that I could be more like that every day. Like just keep on trying, keep on going.
Yeah.
Man, keep moving forward.
I mean, it's like tattooable. Something you could put on your body and everyone would be like, that's a good tattoo. And you'd be like, yeah, I know. I need the reminder.
Yeah, seriously. Always need that reminder for sure. For sure. I cannot end this conversation about Meet the Robinsons without pointing out that this whole movie is a father-son relationship.
Of course, Kelly. Of course, you have to bring it to that.
Like, and it's so precious at the end when Wilbur's like, I never thought my best friend would be my dad, and it's just like, oh yeah, it's so cute. It's adorable, and it also makes me think about how this as a kid it was a pretty cool shock of like, oh my goodness, Lewis is Wilbur's dad. Like, it's such a good plot twist. I mean, as an adult it's like, well, obviously, but like
yeah.
I just love that dynamic. And then it also made me think, I was like, what would it be like to meet my parents at the age that I am now? Like, going and visiting 26-year-old Deb.
I mean, maybe only when we're 13 would it really be worth it. It's the prime time to meet your parents as kids.
As kids, yeah. I mean, I don't even know, man. But, like, I don't know. How your parents are people too, I guess, is what it made me think of. Is like, especially when I think of Wilbur, I'm like, your father is like this super successful, always like moving forward, epic historical figure probably. And
yep.
And then you go back and you have to help motivate him. Like, it's like, yeah, even Lewis started, being really insecure about himself and unsure about his abilities. So, yeah, it just makes me think about that. Like, your parents are people too, and they have strengths and weaknesses just like any other human. And, I mean, that's something you continue to learn, you think, as you get older, But, yeah, I just thought that was it's an interesting...
Yeah. It is interesting. I think about like Wilbur, if you had you could take another film just about his perspective and it would be totally different, you know, because why is he so confident and in helping his father, you know? Like, that's something I always wondered, or not always, but this time watching it, I wondered. And I thought about, like, he's that confident because his parents raise him so well and they encourage him and support him and they're really good parents, and he's got this family community around him that allows him to be confident and playful. But still, like, that would be really hard to go back and talk to your young dad and say, like, this is important and I have to figure it out. You know, it's curious that he is so, he's so confident, and just, I think he also is kind of a foil to Lewis in that way, because, you know, what's Wilbur going to grow up with now? You know, like, is his versus 13-year-old Lewis has the flaw of lack of confidence. 13-year-old Wilbur is overconfident and has the flaw of that.
Yeah.
And, you know, how does he reconcile that later? You know, that would be an interesting sequel, which they canceled.
Oh, yeah.
True fact. They did cancel a sequel.
Bummer.
And I always wondered, you know, maybe that was what it was going to be about, or if it was going to be about, you know, how Lewis makes the next inventions, or I didn't really know, but that's where I wanted it to go, if it were going to go anywhere.
I love that idea. You should pitch that to Disney, see if they'll take it back, you know, and try again. Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that they would, because let's talk about this film on objectively for a second and say that, like, technically one of the reasons that you probably saw this as like a less talked about Disney film is because it was technically like a bomb. Like, it was a box office bomb. It did not do well. It got really bad reviews, and it was expected to make like way more money. I think it cost like $150 million to make, but only earned $169 million worldwide. So gained $19 million. But that's technically really bad in the film world.
Yeah.
Like, that's yikes.
Especially for Disney.
Yeah. And so, you know, they would, it's probably one of the reasons that they canceled the sequel, and it just didn't turn out as well as they thought, which is kind of funny, being as good as I think the film is. It technically didn't do well, which is really odd, and it kind of speaks to, like, well, even this one is a failure too.
Yeah, I mean, it's so strange with Disney films because, like, you know, we've talked about Treasure Planet on the show before too, like, and that's the same, even worse story, actually, of how much that bombed, but, like, how fantastic of a film it is, like, truly, epically perfect. Like, I can't...
Seriously.
Just one of my favorite films. And again, and I think I say the same things over and over, but, like, and I'll say a piece of art in general to go with our conversation, but, like, film or anything you that people make, like, everyone's going to see it differently, and everyone's going to, like, someone is going to really, 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 really need it and love it and be thankful that it exists, you know? And even if it's not a Frozen of the world, like, Meet the Robinsons is definitely, like, one that a lot of people really like. And, I mean, it just goes to show that, like, success needs to be redefined, you know? And I truly, truly don't think money is always the best way to, although it is one way we can, you know, like you said, objectively, like, look at films. It definitely is something to, a factor to look into for sure. And, you know, things like award shows definitely have their place too, with trying to, like, you know, celebrate success and just, like, recognize films for where they're at. But, like, ultimately my favorite thing to look at is, like, what are an individual's experiences with the film. Like, someone has a story about how this film changed their life, And that's true of all art. So
probably somebody who was adopted, I would guess, is probably even more relevant to them than it would be to me. I was not adopted.
Right, me neither. So even the director was adopted, actually. Did you know?
Yeah, I heard about that.
That was a cool fact, which I think just, probably made it even more special for them. But yeah, so it just, all that to say, like, yeah, it's really a bummer that it didn't do as well financially, especially since for us, like, especially, we just love it so much. But that doesn't degrade its value.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I mean, there's a lot of good things about it, and one of the things that I would think is probably part of why it maybe didn't do as well is it came out at kind of a weird time in animation history, and
let's talk about that for sure.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think, this is my opinion here, it came out around when 3D glasses were really popular. And they were trying to make films 3D, and so they created actions and perspectives and gestures that were like built for some of that 3D, and it just doesn't work. It never really did then, and it still doesn't. And I think that is part of why it maybe didn't do as well, is because like they were trying this new technology that they thought maybe was going to catch on and get like super duper popular, and it was like only sort of popular, and they were taking inspiration from so many different things, like The Incredibles and robots, Chicken Little and Jimmy Neutron, and putting all those things together, and to have this kind of weird mashup of the way that the robot moves, Carl, is really different from the way that the humans move, and like it kind of incongruent. And so there's some of those like weird things like that where it's just a little bit odd because the timing wasn't ready for human animation, really, from what I can tell.
Yes, and that is definitely the note that I wanted to talk about animation wise, is that like this is definitely absolutely just a time in animation history where like CG animated movies, like fully CG animated movies, that's still just kind of blossoming more, especially in Disney and like Disney animation specifically. And I was looking through their list of films, and I'm pretty sure this is the first Disney animated film that is fully CG with human main characters. Before that, it was all animal main characters. And so of course, this is like totally new. They're animating humans with 3D. And so, like you said, The Incredibles, like taking inspiration from that, because The Incredibles was the first Pixar full length that was all humans. And all human CG. And that was the pinnacle. That was like the marker you're trying to hit, is like The Incredibles. So yeah, this was just Disney tipping their toes into that, and it's so fascinating because of course now every single Disney animated movie is CG, and it's humans, and you've got Elsa running around and creating ice things and whatever. It looks totally it looks so different. Again, I'm always just like, how technology just moves so fast. Like even watching this again, I'm like, oh yeah, this is not the same level anymore. Like, because like I just compare everything to Frozen 2 because but it's so freaking beautiful. Frozen 2 is beautiful animation, and I'm just like, wow. Technology, I can't just imagine another like 15 years what it's going to be like. I can't imagine. Okay. Animation freak out. That's what we're here for.
We're here to say that in 15 years there will be virtual reality Frozen 4, and it will be great.
I'm ready for it. Oh man. I want to say too, like speaking of The Incredibles, while this film was in production, Disney announced it was acquiring Pixar. And so you kind of have this transition in Disney animation history as well, kind of happening at this time. Mm-hmm. And because of that, John Lasseter actually came in and, like, you know, brought some recommendations for the film. And because of that, they actually ended up changing like 40% of the film. I'm like, great. Yeah, no, listen to Lasseter.
Yeah. Yep.
The only other thing that I wanted to mention is that the film is based off of the 1990 children's book A Day with Wilbur Robinson by William Joyce. And the book does not have time travel elements, but does have like the crazy Robinson family and Wilbur and Lewis and their kind of like adventure with the family. So it's always interesting how a lot of films, animated films in the US, are based off of books and children's books, and how there's always just so much freedom in changing things and just like really using those source materials as like a jumping off point and creating something entirely new and different. And I just, you know, because I always think about How to Train a Dragon, right? Like, the books are just so different, but like the heart still feels the same. And like you take the books and look at the movies, and you're like, this is a horrible adaptation. Well, yeah, it's a reinvention.
Yeah,
and I don't think that's a bad thing. And ultimately, isn't that what? To go with our theme for this episode, isn't that what all art is? Like, we are nothing is new is under the sun. Like, we are all just building off of other things and other art and other creations, and we are adding ourselves into it and creating something else, and we're all just a layer of paint.
Ooh, there you go. There's your episode title. We're all just layers of paint. Yeah, I mean, it is true though. You know, I've been working on a project for the past year or so of a original series, and it's hard because it's original, quote unquote. And, you know, it's original in that like we're trying to invent a world and new kingdoms and characters that don't exist anywhere else, and a lore of a world building sort of thing. But even that is all inspired by, you know, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and other like fantasy writers and such. So even that, you know, even though we're claiming it is like an original thing, we're still building on our inspirations. And it's okay. I'm okay that like this film was inspired by the book, and you know, I think William Joyce was a producer on Robots, and that's something that I found really interesting when I was doing some of the research, because the writer of the book ended up, you know, acting as a producer in a different movie, and then took the style that he worked on in that movie and kind of applied it to this one. And you can see it in the way that they move and in the way they're kind of colored and the animations, and just in general, there's just a similar aesthetic. And I think even that's kind of interesting, because talk about style and layers of paint, like you're just stealing from yourself.
Well, and that's it too, right? I think I've said this before too, but like, an artist, and I'm totally stealing this from Andy J. Pizza. An artist is always plagiarizing themselves. Yeah. Like, and that's good, and I think should be encouraged and should be normalized, because you are always, as an artist, kind of reinventing the same things. Like, we all kind of connect with the different themes, we all connect with different ideas, and we're always going to keep revisiting these things because they're part of who we are, and we're going to keep wanting to refine it. Like, you can't just tell Wes Anderson to stop being Wes Anderson. You know, like,
Yeah.
you know what you're seeing when
No
you
more
see a Wes
symmetrical
Anderson
shots,
film.
Wes. Take out those symmetricals. You can't do it anymore. No more pastels. No more fonts in the middle of the screen that tell you a large part of the story. None.
No.
That'll never happen.
Exactly. Like, you know, an artist is always like building on and I think of Makoto Shinkai. You know, Your Name, one of the biggest anime films worldwide, could not have existed without Garden of Words and 5 centimeters per second. And all of the other films where he was exploring the same themes of love and separation. Like, it's just what artists do.
Yep.
And it's good anyway. So all of that to say, like, yeah, it's totally reasonable and valid and should be encouraged. And yeah, plagiarize yourself. Go back and try an old idea again.
Yeah.
Do it.
To continue to use Andy J. Pizza's inspiration, I took his Skillshare class.
Oh, did you?
And I did, and it was phenomenal. He has 2, and I completed the first one, and I started the second one, and I'm like halfway through it right now. But the second one is about style and like how to find it, and it gives you like these games and these strategies to play to kind of figure it out. And I think it's really fun because what you basically do is like look back at a bunch of things that you have done and you've created, or that you like, or that you have experienced, and you draw connections between them, and you start to like strategically think about what are the similarities between these things, and then you can pull out like themes that you enjoy. And it's kind of a fun practice because it reminds you, oh, like I do really like father-son stories.
Yes.
I do really like ensemble based things, or like things about like an intimate relationship, or when I did it, I discovered actually I like romance more than I thought.
Really? That is fascinating to hear from you.
I know, like
I don't peg you that way. I peg you as just like comedic, like.
Yeah, like that's I think how a lot of people would peg me, but I actually really like romance because if you think about the life that I've lived, I'm like such a romantic to my wife.
You are.
Sometimes I'm just squishy, and I think that I've had to admit that in the work that I like, whether it's Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin, their romance is very squishy and silly, or if it's I have a poster on my wall right now for Paperman, that animated short. Or if it's Casablanca, I have another poster on my wall about that. There's a lot of romance in those things, and I really, really like them. But I have yet to actually use that in something I've created. I've made very little romance as an artist, like made it. So it's one of the things that I'm going to try to explore now because I've decided to dive into things I'm not familiar with, and look at myself and plagiarize myself and try it again. So I'll see in what new combinations can I take physical comedy and I don't know, music and simple storylines and put some romance in there and see what happens, because I usually don't, but I have wanted to. So it's all that to say, at the same time, it's about playing. We're going to go back to that. Like, it's about playing with your art and trying new things, experimenting, and not expecting everything to, like, be successful or make you money or
even fit into a box or even fit into a category. Like, create your own category.
That's creativity.
Oh, yes. And make mistakes and keep moving forward. And I hope you've enjoyed our conversation about art in the midst of this conversation about Meet the Robinsons.
Surprise. It's about so much more.
This is a peek into the normal conversations of Josh and Kelly.
Oh, boy. Yeah, it's true. Like, this is just what they are.
This is what we talk about, creativity. And go be creative and don't get stuck in the past.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. for joining me for this conversation, Josh. It's always a blast having you on.
Of course, Kelly, this has been a pleasure, and there's so much more we could still talk about with this stuff. I mean, we didn't even get to the fact that Adam West, Batman, plays the pizza delivery guy. Like, come on. I just had to drop that fact because it's so funny.
It's so funny. It's so good, and he does such a great job with it,
He
honestly.
really does. So this has been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on, as usual. I always have such a blast.
Thank you. And we will chat again really soon, as in next week for a What You Watching episode.
That's right.
All right. We'll talk to y'all soon.
Bye-bye for now.
As always, thank you so much for listening. Let us know your thoughts on Meet the Robinsons by emailing us at fanimatedpodcast@gmail.com or by messaging us on Facebook and Instagram at fanimatedpodcast. Don't forget to leave us a rating and review telling us what we should be watching next. And if you'd like the chance to vote for upcoming episode topics like this one, you can join the Fanimated crew over at patreon.com/fanimated. Thank you to everyone who supports the show and made this episode possible. Our music is provided by Purple Planet Music and the art is done by myself. You can find me on Instagram at CandorDraw. Thank you to Josh for joining me today, and we'll talk at you next week with a new What You Watching. In the meantime, stay tuned and stay animated.
Meet the Robinsons, a slew of ridiculous creations and companions. They live in the future with their inventions. Keep moving forward, whatever you do, they say. Embrace your failure and see it through. Oh, the Robinsons, yes, the Robinsons, a group of intelligent, mostly humans. Watch out for Bowler Hat Guy. I'm not sure how well this song was thought through.